the one thing all humans share, at least so far, is that we all inhabit the same limited amount of real estate, which is planet Earth. And in that sense, if you say like life evolved in Darwinian perspective by adapting to the environment, that first to the ocean, then to the land, then to the trees, then to the savanna, and then the monkey became man. But then once we liberated our front paws and got opposing thumbs and became capable of manipulating material, we invented tools, technology, and architecture. We actually got the power to adapt the environment to life. So instead of life adapting to the physical surroundings, life could suddenly adapt the physical surroundings to life. And that's of course like a tremendous power. And then in that sense, we found ways of doing that by building buildings and cities and organizing landscapes, building dams, turning like forest land into farmland, like all these things, to the point where you talk about the current era as the Anthropocene, which is the geological era where the biggest force influencing geological transformations of the planet today come from humans. So it is really desertification, deforestation, conversion of forest into farmland, dams that like flood valleys and create new lakes and force populations to migrate, increasing temperatures that forces like glaciers to recede or the permafrost to move north, and all these things. And a lot of them are sort of unanticipated negative side effects of the Anthropocene, or like the omnipresence of mankind. But it also just shows that we actually have, in a way, like the good news is that if we have the power to radically transform our planet by accident, imagine what we can do if we're actually trying to do it. So in that sense, there's an amazing, like once you've accepted that there's no way we can be here without having a very, very significant influence on our planet, we just have to take it as a positive. Instead of having unanticipated negative social and environmental side effects, we should design our world so that we have positive social and environmental side effects. And then I think one of the things, the beauty about the human project is that depending on when you start counting from, but I think National Geographic have something called the Genographic Project, the National Genographic Project, where they trace the migration of mankind from East Africa. And I think they have an Eve, a human specimen originating in East Africa 60,000 years ago. The good thing about having 60,000 years of practice is that we've already run a lot of experiments on different parts of the planet. And therefore, we've already learned a lot of things. And therefore, it is very meaningful for an architect to study the local culture and the local architecture and the vernacular architecture of the local region to understand how have this population found ways to respond to the local climate in ways that makes this part of the world really enjoyable to mankind, and to use that as a source of inspiration. One of the things that's true in an increasingly globalized world is that since place has significance, and since climate, local landscape, local materials have significance, I would say the problem of modernism and the idea of the international style was that buildings started looking the same everywhere. And that became like a loss of local character and specificity. It also became a failed response to the local environment, to the local culture, to the local climate. Whereas I do think that since different cities have different cultural and ethnic and religious national compositions, each, and they also have radically different climates. Anyway, each city becomes a very specific experiment in how to inhabit this particular part of the planet for this particular group of people. I think where this idea becomes interesting is that once you start to look at the planet as having different landscapes and different climates, you'll also find that there's certain situations that in very, very different parts of the world, with maybe very different cultures, maybe the landscape and the climate is very similar. So there's actually lessons to be learned here that can be applied here, and vice versa. But again, I also like this idea that if you look at the world as an ongoing experiment of how to inhabit this limited amount of real estate, then I actually do think that's why architects go on study trips. That you could actually imagine sort of almost like this sort of catalogue of global best practices that, Copenhagen and Melbourne and Sydney, New York and Melbourne and Sydney have incorporated the bicycle lanes of Copenhagen. In Australia, they call them Copenhagen lanes. But it's essentially this idea to walk the earth and see how people have found ways of organizing their cities, and then actually once in a while to get inspired and say, like, that's a great idea, let's take that and bring it here. But of course, the bicycle lanes or the Copenhagen lanes in Australia and Melbourne are going to be Melbourne and Sydney are going to be unlike anything you've seen in Copenhagen, because as soon as they arrive to Australia, it's a different climate, different landscape, and therefore the result is going to be of a completely different character.